Hello, and welcome to Mind Sherlock, where every story feels like a conversation over a warm cup of coffee. Today, I bring you a brand new Sherlock Holmes mystery, filled with twists, clues, and clever deductions. Make yourself comfortable, and let's unravel the case together. And if you'd like, leave a quick comment and tell me where you're joining from. It's always a pleasure to know where our little detective community is tuning in from. Now, let's get started. It was on a particularly thick and oppressive evening in late autumn that I found myself once again in the familiar surroundings of 221B Baker Street. Outside, a dense fog clung to the streets of London, swallowing the gaslight and muffling the distant clatter of carriage wheels. Within, however, all was warm and still. Holmes lay stretched upon the settee, his long, slender fingers steepled together in quiet contemplation, while I occupied my usual chair by the hearth, a copy of the Times open upon my lap. For some time, neither of us spoke. I had grown accustomed to these silences, knowing full well that Holmes's mind was ever at work, digesting some problem known only to himself. Presently, however, he broke the stillness with a sudden remark. "Watson, you have been restless these past few minutes. Either the Times has failed to engage you, or there is something on your mind." I smiled, shaking my head. "Merely the weather, Holmes. London is at its most dismal tonight." He nodded absently, his keen grey eyes fixed upon the ceiling. "True enough. A night such as this invites the sinister, the inexplicable. It is precisely the kind of evening when a desperate soul might seek refuge in our humble abode." As if in answer to his prediction, a sudden sharp knock echoed through the sitting room. I started, but Holmes merely raised an eyebrow, the faintest flicker of amusement touching his lips. "Well, Watson," he murmured, rising smoothly from his seat, "let us see what mystery the fog has delivered to our door." Mrs. Hudson, ever the soul of discretion, ushered in our late-night visitor with an air of quiet concern. The lady who stepped into the room was tall and elegant, though her countenance bore the unmistakable signs of distress. A heavy cloak was drawn tightly about her shoulders, and the hood, now pushed back, revealed a face of striking refinement, though her trembling hands betrayed her agitation. Holmes, ever the master of observation, took in every detail at a glance. "Good evening, madam," he said smoothly. "You have come at an unusual hour, which suggests both urgency and discretion. Please be seated. Watson, if you would be so good as to pour our guest a measure of brandy." I did so at once, and the lady accepted it with a murmur of thanks, her gloved fingers clutching the glass as though for support. For a moment, she seemed to struggle with words. Then, with a deep breath, she steadied herself and spoke. "My name is Lady Eleanor Cavendish. I have come to you, Mr. Holmes, because there is no one else I can trust." Holmes inclined his head. "Pray continue." She hesitated, then leaned forward. "An unspeakable theft has occurred. The royal necklace, a priceless heirloom belonging to the crown, has been stolen under impossible circumstances." Holmes's eyes gleamed with sudden interest. "Impossible, you say? That is an intriguing choice of words." "It is the only word that suits, Mr. Holmes," she said gravely. "The vault was sealed, the guards were present all night, and yet, by morning, the necklace was gone." Holmes sat back, his fingers drumming upon the arm of his chair. "Fascinating. Tell me everything, Lady Cavendish. Begin at the beginning and omit nothing." Lady Eleanor's voice grew steadier as she relayed the details of the baffling crime. "The royal necklace, as you may know, is an object of both immense value and historical significance. It is kept within the most secure vault in Buckingham Palace, safeguarded under conditions that make theft utterly inconceivable. Holmes gave a slight nod, his gaze unwavering. Describe these conditions, if you please. The vault is constructed of reinforced steel, accessible only through a single entrance. It is guarded at all times, and only one man possesses the key, Lord Harrington, the royal treasurer. Each night, the necklace is secured within a locked glass case inside the vault. The case itself is made of unbreakable crystal, fitted with a mechanism that would trigger an alarm if disturbed. She paused, and her hands tightened over the folds of her cloak. On the evening of the theft, the necklace was last seen at precisely 11 p.m. The vault was then sealed, the guards stationed at their posts, and the entire palace retired for the night. And yet, Holmes prompted, his voice smooth as silk. By morning, she swallowed. By morning, when Lord Harrington arrived to inspect the vault, the necklace had vanished. The vault remained locked. The glass case was intact. The guards swore that no one entered or left, and yet somehow the necklace was gone without a trace. A silence followed, broken only by the ticking of the clock upon the mantel. I found myself utterly confounded. The very notion of a theft under such conditions defied logic. I glanced at Holmes, expecting to see skepticism upon his features. But instead, I saw something else. A rare, glimmering excitement. The perfect crime, he murmured. A theft with no thief, no entry, and no evidence of wrongdoing. Lady Cavendish, I congratulate you. She blinked. Congratulate me, Mr. Holmes. Indeed, you have brought me a mystery worthy of my intellect. For the first time since her arrival, a flicker of hope touched Lady Eleanor's face. Then, you will take the case? Holmes smiled. My dear lady, I should be most delighted. Holmes sat motionless, fingers pressed together in that familiar attitude of deep thought. His sharp, hawk-like gaze had not once left Lady Eleanor's face as she concluded her extraordinary account. It is not merely improbable, I murmured, more to myself than to my companion. It is impossible. Holmes let out a quiet chuckle. And yet, Watson, the impossible has evidently occurred. I shook my head. A vault that is never left unguarded, a single entrance that remained locked, and a glass case that was untouched. A man might as well try to pluck the moon from the sky. And yet, Holmes repeated softly, someone has plucked it. He turned to Lady Eleanor. Your description is most illuminating, my lady. Tell me, has anyone, servant, official or otherwise, been dismissed or fallen under suspicion? She hesitated. No one. Scotland Yard has questioned every individual with access to the vault, but the accounts align perfectly. Not a single discrepancy. Fascinating. Holmes leaned back in his chair, his eyes half closed. A theft without a thief, a crime with neither method nor opportunity. Yes, Watson, this is a problem most singular. There was a moment of silence. Then, with a sudden movement, Holmes sprang to his feet. It seems, my dear Watson, that the game is afoot. Lady Eleanor drew her cloak about her shoulders as though warding off an unseen chill. There is one more matter, Mr. Holmes, she said. Scotland Yard has, quite discreetly, sought your assistance. Holmes arched an eyebrow. Discreetly? She nodded. They have been unable to make sense of the affair. Inspector Lestrade is convinced the culprit must be within the palace itself, yet every lead has crumbled under scrutiny. The Yard is eager to avoid a scandal, but they know time is against them. If the press catches wind of this, she trailed off, her meaning clear. The monarchy embarrassed, the government in uproar, and the public in a frenzy, Holmes said dryly. Yes, I imagine the Commissioner would prefer to keep this matter quiet. They are desperate, Mr. Holmes. Will you help? For a moment, Holmes said nothing. His fingers drummed lightly against the mantelpiece. Then he smiled. My dear lady, Scotland Yard is often in a state of desperation. But as it happens, I find myself inclined to indulge them. Just this once. Holmes moved swiftly now, his mind clearly set upon the course ahead. We shall begin at Buckingham Palace itself, he announced, reaching for his coat. There is much to be learned at the scene of the crime. Lady Eleanor exhaled in visible relief. Thank you, Mr. Holmes. Do not thank me yet, my lady, he said lightly, adjusting his hat. I have not yet solved your mystery. He turned to me. Watson, your revolver. I blinked. Revolver? Good heavens, Holmes, you cannot suspect. I suspect nothing, my dear fellow, he interrupted. But one should always be prepared. Who knows? This may be more than a matter of mere theft. There was a gleam in his eye, one I had seen before, a glimmer of exhilaration, of hunger for the unknown. And so, without further delay, we set out into the London night, bound for Buckingham Palace and the enigma that awaited us. The great gates of Buckingham Palace loomed before us as our carriage rattled to a stop, the thick London fog swirling in the lamplight. A uniformed official ushered us through the entrance without delay, his manner brisk but deferential, as though mindful of the storm brewing within the palace walls. At the foot of the grand staircase, Inspector Lestrade awaited us. His usually impassive countenance bore signs of strain, and as we approached, he gave a curt nod, his fingers drumming impatiently against his coat. About time, Mr. Holmes, he muttered, glancing about as though fearful of unseen ears. This is a delicate matter. Very delicate. The Yard is in a difficult position. Holmes's sharp gaze flickered over the inspector. Ah. Then I assume you have exhausted your conventional methods and have arrived at the inevitable conclusion that you require my assistance. Lestrade scowled, but said nothing. He gestured for us to follow, leading us through the gilded corridors of the palace. The Home Secretary himself has given strict orders to keep this affair out of the papers, he continued in a hushed voice. If word gets out that a priceless royal heirloom has vanished under our very noses, there'll be hell to pay. And yet, Holmes murmured, the fact that we are here suggests that despite the secrecy, you remain utterly baffled. Lestrade exhaled sharply. Baffled? Holmes, this is damned witchcraft. The vault was locked, the case untouched, and no one, not a soul, entered or left. I tell you, it's impossible. Holmes's lips curled into a faint smile. Impossible. Then we are in the presence of something truly remarkable. Lead on, Inspector. Lestrade led us down a narrow corridor, its walls lined with oil paintings of past monarchs, until we reached a heavy steel door guarded by 2 sentries. At his command, one of them produced a large iron key, which he inserted into the lock. With a grinding of metal, the door swung open, revealing the inner sanctum of the royal vault. I had expected something akin to a bank's strong room, filled with great chests of jewels and gold, but instead the chamber was stark and minimal. A single pedestal stood at its centre, atop which rested a glass case of remarkable craftsmanship. Holmes stepped forward at once, his eyes sweeping over the room with unerring precision. The case was found just as we see it now, he inquired. Lestrade nodded. Not a single scratch, and the vault itself was locked all night. Holmes tapped lightly against the glass, his fingers lingering upon its edges. No forced entry. No signs of tampering. He turned sharply. The guards, where were they positioned? 2 at the door outside, Lestrade replied. Another patrolling the hallway at intervals. None of them heard or saw a thing. Holmes dropped to one knee and examined the floor. Then, quite suddenly, he pressed his nose to the glass case and inhaled deeply. "A faint chemical scent," he murmured. "Curious." Lestrade frowned. "I don't smell a thing." Holmes ignored him, rising swiftly. His keen gaze darted about the room. "The vault itself, has it any other points of access? A hidden panel? A ventilation shaft?" Lestrade hesitated. "There is a ventilation system, yes, but it is far too narrow for a man to pass through." Holmes's expression did not change, but I knew at once that his keenest suspicions had been roused. "Watson," he said quietly, "I believe we have just glimpsed our first whisper of the solution." Holmes stood motionless beside the glass case, his gaze fixed not on the missing necklace's former resting place, but on the space above it. I had long since learned that such moments of silent contemplation were not idleness, but rather the sharpening of an already formidable intellect. "Do you detect anything unusual, Watson?" he asked suddenly. I stepped forward, inhaling deeply. "Nothing beyond the scent of polished steel and the damp chill of the vault." "Indeed," Holmes murmured. "And yet there is something else, something subtle." He bent forward, drawing in a slow breath through his nostrils. "It is faint but unmistakable. A chemical of some kind, not perfume nor oil, something artificial." Lestrade, who had been standing with his arms crossed impatiently, gave an exasperated sigh. "Holmes, if you're sniffing for clues, you'll be here all night." Holmes ignored him. Instead, he turned his attention to the ground, his keen eyes sweeping the pristine floor with the precision of a surgeon examining an incision. Then abruptly, he pointed. "Here," he said. I followed his gaze and saw a single, nearly imperceptible print of fine dust, a detail so small that it would have escaped any but the most meticulous observer. Lestrade scowled. "Well? Some speck of dirt. What of it?" Holmes's lips curled. "My dear Lestrade, I wonder, do you often find such dust inside a meticulously cleaned vault?" "No." "Then tell me, how did it get here?" Neither the inspector nor I had an answer. But in the glint of Holmes's eye, I knew that the first thread of this great mystery had been pulled. Holmes rose swiftly and turned to Lestrade. "Now, let us speak with the only man who could have opened this vault, Lord Harrington." We were escorted to a grand chamber where Lord Arthur Harrington, the royal treasurer, awaited us. A distinguished gentleman in his 60s, he carried himself with the air of one accustomed to power, though his rigid posture and tightly clasped hands betrayed his discomfort. "Mr. Holmes," he said, his voice crisp, "I trust you will bring swiftness to this matter. It is of the utmost delicacy." Holmes inclined his head. "I shall endeavour to do so, my lord. You hold the only key to the vault, do you not?" "I do. It has never left my possession." Holmes's gaze sharpened. "Never?" Lord Harrington hesitated, just for an instant, but it was enough. "Not since the night before last," he admitted. "As is customary, I locked the vault before retiring and checked it personally in the morning." And yet, the necklace was gone. His jaw tightened. "Yes." Holmes studied him for a moment. Then, quite suddenly, he turned on his heel. "Come, Watson. We have much yet to learn." And with that, he strode from the room, leaving behind a perplexed nobleman and an utterly bewildered Lestrade. The next name upon Holmes's list was Sir Reginald Blythe, a well-known financier whose influence had once extended across the higher circles of London's elite. However, time had not been kind to him. His name had become entangled with whispers of ruin, failed ventures, soured investments, and an air of quiet desperation that clung to him like a shadow. We found him in the palace drawing room, seated stiffly in a high-backed chair, his fingers drumming an impatient rhythm upon the armrest. His thin face, though carefully composed, betrayed a nervous tension. Holmes approached him with that peculiar air of casual indifference which I knew concealed his most acute observations. "Sir Reginald," he said smoothly, "you were present at the palace on the night of the theft?" Blythe gave a curt nod. "I was. As you must know, I have certain financial dealings with the Crown. My presence was neither unusual nor suspicious." Holmes inclined his head. "And yet, there are those who suggest your financial difficulties have placed you in a position of some, shall we say, urgency." A flicker of irritation crossed Blythe's face. "Mr. Holmes, I am a gentleman. Whatever my misfortunes, I do not resort to thievery." "Indeed," Holmes murmured. "And tell me, Sir Reginald, where were you at precisely 11 o'clock that night?" Blythe hesitated. "In my chambers, alone." Holmes's fingers drummed lightly against his own armrest, mimicking the financier's restless habit. How unfortunate. A man with great debts and no alibi. Surely you must see how this presents an unsavoury picture. Blythe rose abruptly. "I will not be insulted, Mr. Holmes." Holmes only smiled. "Insult, Sir Reginald? I have done no such thing. But I do find one thing curious. You were seen leaving the palace grounds much later than your usual hour." Blythe's lips parted, but for the first time he had no ready reply. Holmes studied him a moment longer, then turned to me. "Come, Watson. I believe we have one more visit to make." Our final interview of the day led us to the palace workshop, where the Crown's most valued treasures were maintained under the watchful eye of Miss Beatrice Dunwich. Unlike Sir Reginald Blythe, who had met us with restrained hostility, Miss Dunwich greeted us with a cold and practised composure. She was a woman of no more than 30, her dark hair swept into a tight chignon, her expression neither warm nor unkind. Dressed in the sombre garb of her profession, she bore the air of one who had spent her life in quiet servitude to something greater than herself. Holmes studied her with keen interest before speaking. "Miss Dunwich, I understand you were among the last to see the royal necklace before its disappearance." She met his gaze steadily. "I was, Mr. Holmes. As the chief jeweller, it is my duty to inspect the crown jewels at regular intervals. I conducted my usual examination on the morning of the theft." "And you observed nothing amiss?" "Nothing at all. The necklace was in perfect condition when I left it." Holmes nodded thoughtfully. "I see. And tell me, Miss Dunwich, have you ever encountered Sir Reginald Blythe?" A flicker of something, recognition perhaps, passed through her expression before she suppressed it. "I have seen him at court functions, but we have never spoken." Holmes stepped closer, his voice dropping to a softer register. "And yet, you seem startled by my question." For the first time, she hesitated. "It is only that I do not see what relevance he has to my work." Holmes smiled faintly. "Perhaps none at all." His gaze drifted to the workbench behind her, where a small glass vial lay half hidden among the jeweller's tools. With a swift motion, he plucked it from its resting place. "What is this?" he asked. Miss Dunwich's composure faltered. "A common solvent, used for cleaning." Holmes uncorked the vial and took a cautious sniff. His expression remained unreadable, but I knew at once that he had discovered something of great significance. "Curious," he murmured. "A jeweller's workshop, a misplaced vial, and a theft that should have been impossible." He turned to me with a gleam in his eye. "Watson, I do believe we are on the verge of a most singular revelation. Holmes stood in quiet contemplation, his fingers interlaced before him, while Inspector Lestrade shuffled impatiently at his side. Before us sat the three figures whose names had surfaced in our inquiries: Lord Harrington, Sir Reginald Blythe, and Miss Beatrice Dunwich. Holmes regarded them with a curious detachment, as though they were specimens beneath his magnifying glass. "We have in this room 3 individuals with clear motives," he began. "Yet, curiously, we are left with the peculiar difficulty that each of you possesses a verifiable alibi." Lord Harrington, his rigid posture betraying suppressed agitation, was the first to speak. "Mr. Holmes, I have already told you, I was in my chambers from 10 o'clock onwards. The guards stationed at my door can attest to this. How could I have entered the vault?" Holmes nodded. "Indeed, my lord. And you, Sir Reginald?" The financier let out a short breath. "I retired early that night. I took a walk through the gardens at 11, and the palace staff can confirm it. I did not step foot inside the vault." Holmes turned his gaze to Miss Dunwich, whose expression remained carefully composed. "And you, madam?" She met his gaze steadily. "I was locked inside my workshop for the evening, performing routine inspections on several pieces. The guards can confirm I did not leave." Lestrade gave a scoffing laugh. "And there we have it. No one could have stolen the necklace, and yet it is gone." He folded his arms. "I tell you, Holmes, it's magic." Holmes gave a rare smile. "No, Lestrade, it is science." His gaze swept once more across the room. "And I dare say, the truth lies hidden somewhere in plain sight." His fingers drummed lightly against his chin as he turned to me. "Come, Watson, there is yet one last test to conduct before we unravel this impossible affair." Lestrade paced the length of the drawing room, his agitation manifesting in short, impatient gestures. "It must be an inside job, Holmes. There's no other way to explain it." Holmes, reclining in an armchair, regarded him with mild amusement. "Indeed, Lestrade. And yet, you are entirely unable to point to a single individual who could have accomplished it." The inspector let out a frustrated huff. "You heard them yourself. The vault was locked, the guards were at their posts, and not a single soul entered or left between 11 o'clock at night and 6 in the morning. And yet, come sunrise, the necklace is gone." I could not help but share Lestrade's exasperation. "It is absurd, Holmes. A theft without a thief. A crime committed with neither entry nor exit. I confess I see no way forward." Holmes steepled his fingers. "Watson, the absence of evidence is often the most compelling clue of all. If we accept that no one entered the vault, then we must entertain a more interesting possibility. What if the necklace was never removed at all?" Lestrade scoffed. "That's a fine riddle, Holmes, but unless you mean to tell me the thing up and walked away on its own." "Precisely." The inspector halted mid-step. "What?" Holmes smiled faintly. "A vault is a cage for the body, Lestrade, but there are methods, scientific methods, that allow for matter to change state, to move unseen. Tell me, did any of your men report an unusual scent in the vault?" Lestrade frowned. "Scent? What in blazes does that have to do with anything?" Holmes waved a hand. "Perhaps nothing. Perhaps everything. Come, Watson, I believe our next course of action lies not with our suspects, but with the very air itself." Holmes insisted on returning to the vault immediately, much to Lestrade's grumbling discontent. Upon our arrival, he strode to the centre of the room and inhaled deeply, his sharp gaze flitting toward the ceiling. "Watson, do you note anything unusual?" I obeyed his lead, drawing in the stale air of the vault. Nothing beyond the scent of steel and stone. Holmes tapped a finger against his temple. Yet there is something here, something faint but unmistakable. He produced a white handkerchief, held it near one of the vault's ventilation grates, and remained motionless for several moments. When he withdrew it, there was a fine dusting of pale residue upon the fabric. Lestrade peered over his shoulder. "What's that, then?" Holmes examined the substance with great interest. "A most intriguing powder, Lestrade. And I suspect a most crucial clue." Lestrade rubbed his jaw. "What are you getting at, Holmes?" "That depends," Holmes replied. "Have your men examined the ventilation system?" Lestrade shook his head. "Of course not. The vents are too narrow for a man to crawl through." Holmes smiled. "Ah, but that presumes a man is what we seek. What if, my dear Lestrade, the necklace did not exit the vault, but rather escaped it?" I stared at him. "Escaped?" Holmes dusted his hands and pocketed the handkerchief. "Watson, I believe we must pay a visit to St. Bartholomew's Hospital. I have a suspicion, and I should like it confirmed." Lestrade threw up his hands. "And what am I to do in the meantime?" Holmes clapped a hand upon his shoulder. "Pray, Inspector, continue not solving the case. You are rather exceptional at it." And with that, we departed, leaving Lestrade fuming in our wake. Holmes placed the white handkerchief into my hands with an air of finality. "Watson, I require your skills in the laboratory. Take this to St. Bartholomew's Hospital and conduct a full chemical analysis. I have my suspicions, but I require confirmation." I regarded him with some surprise. "And what will you be doing in the meantime?" Holmes retrieved his pocket watch and flicked it open. "Ah, there are certain threads in this tapestry that require a delicate tug. Lestrade remains convinced of an ordinary theft, and I have no desire to relieve him of that illusion. Yet. Meanwhile, I shall follow a line of inquiry that may prove most illuminating." With that, we parted ways, and I set out for St. Bartholomew's, where my former medical colleagues granted me the use of their equipment. It took some hours of careful experimentation, but at last I had an answer, one that left me both intrigued and unsettled. When I returned to Baker Street, I found Holmes already seated, deep in thought. "Ah, Watson," he murmured, "I trust you bring me news of consequence." I placed my notes before him. "The powder is an unstable compound that, under the right conditions, transforms into gas, only to resolidify when exposed to cool air." A gleam of satisfaction flickered in his eyes. "Precisely as I suspected. Tell me, Watson, what does that suggest to you?" I frowned. If such a substance were used, then in theory, an object could be made to disappear, only to reform elsewhere. Holmes tapped his fingers together. "My dear Watson, I do believe we are close to understanding how our thief escaped the inescapable." Before I could press Holmes further on his thoughts, the door to 221B Baker Street was flung open, and in marched Inspector Lestrade, his face alight with triumph. "It's over, Holmes," he declared. "We have our man." Holmes raised an eyebrow. "Do tell, Lestrade. I am all attention." Lestrade tossed a folded telegram onto the table. "Sir Reginald Blythe, caught trying to pawn the royal necklace at a shop in Whitechapel." I started in disbelief. Blythe? But how could he have stolen it? "Does it matter?" Lestrade scoffed. "He was desperate for money, and we've got solid proof. Case closed." Holmes chuckled, a quiet, knowing sound. "Ah, Lestrade, your conclusions are as swift as they are flawed. Tell me, was the necklace genuine?" The inspector hesitated. "Well, no, it was a duplicate. But that only proves he's already disposed of the real one." Holmes leaned forward. or it proves that someone wanted him to take the fall. Consider Lestrade. If Blythe were truly our thief, would he be so foolish as to pawn the necklace in London? Lestrade scowled. You think he's innocent. I think he is guilty only of poor judgment. Holmes rose, his eyes gleaming. No, my dear Lestrade, the true thief remains at large, and they have just revealed their hand. Lestrade's triumphant expression had not dimmed as he paced before us. You cannot deny it, Holmes. Blythe was found with the duplicate necklace in his possession. That is evidence enough. Holmes, seated languidly in his armchair, regarded the inspector with an amused glint in his eye. Evidence, Lestrade? Or an illusion carefully placed for you to find? Lestrade scoffed. Now see here. Holmes raised a hand. Let us assume for a moment that Sir Reginald Blythe is our thief. We know for certain that the vault was never breached. If that is true, then how, pray, did he extract the necklace? Lestrade opened his mouth, but Holmes continued, relentless. Consider also the timing. You claim he was caught attempting to sell the necklace in Whitechapel. Would a man of his standing risk his reputation so carelessly? And if he had already exchanged the real necklace for a forgery, why would he be in possession of the fake? Lestrade frowned, but I had already begun to see the shape of Holmes's reasoning. Then you believe he was set up? I asked. Holmes nodded. Exactly, Watson. Someone placed the duplicate necklace in his hands, ensuring that he would be arrested, thus leading Scotland Yard away from the true culprit. Lestrade let out a frustrated sigh. If not Blythe, then who? Holmes sprang to his feet. That, my dear Lestrade, is the question, and I have an inkling as to where we might find our answer. We set out at once for the workshop of Miss Beatrice Dunwich, the royal jeweller whose skill had been entrusted with the maintenance of the crown jewels. Holmes strode ahead with characteristic purpose while I hurried at his side. You suspect Miss Dunwich? I asked. Holmes did not slow his pace. I suspect that she is hiding something. Whether that makes her a criminal or a victim remains to be seen. When we arrived, Miss Dunwich was seated at her workbench, polishing the delicate setting of an emerald brooch. At our approach, she set the brooch down with careful deliberation, her movements controlled, but her fingers trembled ever so slightly. Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, to what do I owe the pleasure? Holmes inclined his head. Miss Dunwich, you examined the royal necklace before its disappearance, did you not? I did, she replied. As I told you before, it was in perfect condition. Holmes moved closer, and yet you seemed rather startled when we inquired about Sir Reginald Blythe. Why is that? She hesitated, a fraction of a second too long. I was merely surprised. I had no dealings with the man. Holmes reached for a small glass vial on her workbench, turning it over in his fingers. Curious. This solvent, it is used for cleaning jewellery, is it not? She nodded. Yes, for polishing metals. Holmes removed the stopper and sniffed. And yet this is not a common solvent, Miss Dunwich. This has a distinctive chemical signature, one that bears a remarkable similarity to the powder found in the vault. Miss Dunwich blanched. Her hands tightened over the edge of the bench, her carefully maintained composure beginning to crack. Holmes smiled faintly. Now, let us try again. Tell me, Miss Dunwich, what exactly were you polishing? Holmes held the glass vial aloft, turning it slowly between his fingers. The residue within clung faintly to the sides, a pale, almost imperceptible dust. Curious, he murmured. Miss Dunwich's composure had been impressive thus far, but at this I noted the smallest flicker of tension in her jaw. Holmes, keenly attuned to such nuances, pressed forward. "This substance is quite distinctive," he continued. "It has an odd chemical signature, one that I believe I encountered inside the royal vault." She straightened. "I have no idea what you mean, Mr. Holmes." Holmes smiled. "No? And yet, Miss Dunwich, your hands tremble ever so slightly. Is it the cold, or do you fear where this conversation may lead?" She exhaled sharply. "If you must know, that vial contained a fine polishing powder, a common substance in my trade. It is used to restore brilliance to precious metals." Holmes nodded. "Indeed. And yet, it is remarkably similar to a compound that, under the right conditions, vaporizes, only to re-solidify elsewhere. A powder that, if manipulated correctly, might allow an object to vanish and reform in another place." A heavy silence filled the workshop. I found myself holding my breath. "I polish jewels, Mr. Holmes," Miss Dunwich said at last, her voice carefully measured. "Nothing more." Holmes's gaze remained fixed upon her, his fingers tapping lightly against the vial. Then, quite suddenly, he pocketed it. "I believe we shall let the facts speak for themselves," he said. "Shall we, Watson?" With that, he turned on his heel, leaving Miss Dunwich staring after him, her face pale, her hands clasped tightly together. We had barely stepped outside the jeweller's workshop when I seized Holmes by the arm. "Holmes, you have found evidence linking Miss Dunwich to the crime, yet you walk away as though nothing is amiss. What do you make of her?" Holmes did not break stride. "Watson, we now face a paradox. The evidence suggests Miss Dunwich's involvement, yet the facts of her alibi state she could not have done it." I frowned. "She was in her workshop all night, locked inside. The palace guards have attested to that." Holmes nodded. "And yet let us review what we know. A powder capable of vaporization was used. A vial of the same residue was found in her possession. She reacted with clear distress when questioned." He stopped abruptly and turned to face me. "Now, Watson, answer me this. How can a person be both absent and present at the crime scene?" I opened my mouth, but no words came. It was an absurdity, and yet there we stood, confronted with it. Holmes smiled at my hesitation. "Precisely, my dear fellow. The very contradiction is the clue itself." I shook my head. "Then what do you propose?" Holmes's eyes gleamed. "We must set a trap, Watson, a trap that will force our phantom thief into the light." I stared at him. "A trap? For whom?" His answer was swift. "Not for Miss Dunwich, my dear Watson. No, for the true mastermind." And with that, he strode forward, leaving me to scramble after him, my mind reeling with unanswered questions. Holmes stood by the window of 221B Baker Street, gazing out at the flickering street lamps below. Behind him, Lestrade sat stiffly in his chair, his expression dark with displeasure. "I do not like it, Holmes," the inspector grumbled. "You mean to tell the press that the case is solved, when in truth the real thief is still at large?" Holmes turned with a faint smile. "Precisely, Lestrade. We must make our unknown adversary believe they have nothing to fear. Only then will they reveal themselves." Lestrade scowled. "And what if your scheme fails? What if the real thief is miles away by now, laughing at us all?" Holmes settled into his chair and steepled his fingers. "I have reason to believe our thief has not fled London. They are still here, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the opportune moment to recover the genuine necklace. But for that, they must believe the danger has passed." Lestrade exhaled sharply. "And so I am to feed a lie to the press?" Holmes smiled. A useful lie, Lestrade. One that will lead us directly to the truth. Reluctantly, the inspector rose. Very well, Holmes. The Yard shall announce that the stolen necklace's duplicate has been found and that we have identified the culprit. He cast one final glance at Holmes before departing. The moment the door clicked shut, I turned to my companion. And now, Holmes. He rose briskly. Now, Watson, we wait for the night, when shadows lengthen and criminals step forth to reclaim what they believe is safely hidden. The air was thick with mist as Holmes and I took our positions near Buckingham Palace, concealed within the dense foliage of a garden enclosure. The hour was late, the streets quiet save for the occasional passing of a patrolman. Holmes had not spoken since we arrived, his entire being attuned to the darkened palace walls, his gaze never straying from the ornate stone gargoyle that jutted from the corner of the building, a grotesque sentinel of ages past. "Why here, Holmes?" I whispered. Surely the thief would have hidden the necklace somewhere less conspicuous. Holmes's eyes did not waver. Our culprit is cunning, Watson, but not without arrogance. They required a place both accessible and overlooked, somewhere the stolen object could be retrieved with ease once suspicion had faded. I shivered, more from anticipation than the cold. "And you truly believe they will come tonight?" Holmes nodded. "The deception we have set in motion will not allow for delay. If they believe the case is closed, they must act now, before the real necklace is discovered." We lapsed into silence once more, our breaths shallow, our ears attuned to the slightest disturbance in the stillness of the night. Then, as the clock struck midnight, Holmes's hand tightened around my arm. "Steady, Watson," he whispered. "Our quarry approaches." Out of the gloom, a cloaked figure emerged, moving with measured caution. They skirted the outer perimeter of the palace, pausing briefly to scan the surroundings before proceeding towards the gargoyle. Holmes tensed beside me. "Observe, Watson," he murmured. "They are confident, yet wary. This is no petty thief, but one well versed in deception." The figure reached the base of the stone carving and extended a gloved hand, probing the weathered grooves. Then, with practiced precision, they loosened a hidden compartment within the gargoyle's mouth. Holmes exhaled softly. "And there lies our missing necklace." Before I could respond, Holmes had risen to his full height. "That will do," he called, his voice ringing across the night. "Step away from the gargoyle, if you please." The figure froze, their hand mere inches from the hidden object. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Then, in a flash of movement, they spun upon their heel and bolted into the darkness. "After them, Watson!" Holmes cried, already in pursuit. I surged forward, my pulse pounding as we tore through the palace grounds. But who was this elusive figure? And more importantly, what lengths would they go to remain unseen? Holmes was upon the fleeing figure in an instant. With a single well-timed motion, he seized the cloak and wrenched it away, revealing the unexpected face of Miss Beatrice Dunwich. I halted mid-stride, unable to suppress my exclamation. Good heavens! Miss Dunwich, her chest heaving, made no attempt to struggle. The pale glow of the gaslights cast sharp shadows upon her face, but her eyes, dark and resolute, held no trace of fear. If anything, there was a certain grim acceptance in her expression. Lestrade, who had only just caught up, let out a triumphant cry. "Well, well, so it was you all along, I might have known." Holmes released her, dusting his hands. "No, Lestrade, you might not have known. In fact, you were quite certain it was Sir Reginald Blythe only yesterday." The inspector scowled. "That is beside the point. She was caught in the act, And that's all I need to know. Miss Dunwich lifted her chin. I suppose you intend to take me in, then? Holmes's gaze was unreadable. That depends, Miss Dunwich. Would you care to tell me who it is you were working for? She said nothing. Holmes sighed. Very well. Then allow me to explain what you will not say. Watson, I trust you are eager to understand how a necklace might be stolen from a vault that was never breached. I nodded. Desperately, Holmes. He smiled. Then prepare yourself, my dear fellow. This is a crime not of stealth, but of science. Lestrade folded his arms. Science, is it? This ought to be good. Holmes turned to me. Watson, you recall the powder residue we found in the vault's ventilation system? Of course, I replied. A fine chemical dust, unstable, capable of changing form under heat. Precisely. Holmes clapped his hands together. Miss Dunwich did not steal the necklace in the conventional sense. She transformed it. I stared at him. Transformed? Holmes gestured toward the unmasked jeweller. Tell me, Miss Dunwich, what is the one thing a jeweller must do before handling a piece of great value? Her lips pressed into a thin line, but she did not reply. Polish it, Holmes answered for her. And when she polished the royal necklace, she coated it with an invisible layer of alchemical powder, one that, when exposed to heat, sublimated the metal, turning it into gas. Lestrade let out a disbelieving laugh. You're telling me she evaporated the necklace? Exactly, Holmes said. Once the vault was sealed, a hidden heat source within the ventilation system activated. The necklace dissolved into vapor, rising through the vents until it reached a cool enough location, perhaps an unguarded corridor or even outside the palace, where it then re-solidified into its original form. I inhaled sharply. So the necklace did not leave the vault through force, it simply moved unseen through the air. Holmes nodded. An elegant crime, Watson, invisible, undetectable, and until now, unsolvable. Miss Dunwich remained silent, her hands clenched at her sides. Lestrade, however, was far from satisfied. So what you're telling me, Holmes, is that she made the necklace walk out of the vault by itself? Holmes gave a small shrug. Not quite. She merely gave it wings. I turned to Miss Dunwich. But why? I asked. You are no common thief. Why take such a risk? She let out a slow breath. Because I had no choice. Holmes inclined his head. Ah, then we have one final mystery before us. Who was it that forced your hand, Miss Dunwich? For the first time, a flicker of hesitation crossed her face. That, she said. I cannot tell you. Lestrade moved to seize her, but Holmes lifted a hand. No need, Lestrade. Miss Dunwich is no flight risk. Holmes, what are you playing at? I asked. Holmes turned, his gaze thoughtful. This crime, Watson, was not the work of one mind, but of two. The hand that stole the necklace was here before us, but the mind behind the crime remains unseen. He smiled faintly. Science and deception, my dear Watson, a most potent combination, and I fear we have only scratched the surface. And with that, the case of the impossible theft of the royal necklace was far from over. Miss Beatrice Dunwich sat in silence, her hands clasped tightly before her. For a long moment, she neither moved nor spoke. Then, at last, with a heavy sigh, she lifted her head. I had no choice, she murmured. I was forced into it. Lestrade scoffed. Forced, were you? And who, pray, compelled you to commit theft against the crown? She hesitated, her dark eyes flickering to Holmes, who regarded her with his usual piercing calm. I do not know his name, she admitted. He came to me a month ago, a man in a grey suit and gloves, his voice calm, deliberate. He knew everything about me, my work, my habits, even my debts. Debts? I repeated. She nodded. My father. He left me with nothing but unpaid accounts. I struggled to keep my position here, but it was not enough. Then this man appeared. He told me that if I did exactly as I was instructed, my financial troubles would vanish. If I refused, her voice faltered. Holmes's eyes glinted. Then ruin would follow, I presume. She nodded. I did not think it possible. He gave me the powder and precise instructions. The vault's ventilation, the hidden heat source, where to retrieve the necklace later. He planned everything. Lestrade smacked his fist into his palm. Blast it, Holmes. Then she isn't the true mastermind. Holmes allowed himself a small smile. No, Lestrade. She is merely a pawn in a far greater game. I turned to Holmes. And who, then, is our true adversary? Holmes leaned back, his fingers steepled. Consider, Watson, the intellect required to orchestrate such an elaborate crime, the knowledge of alchemy, chemistry, and physics, the ruthlessness to manipulate others into executing his designs. Does this not call to mind a familiar spectre? I felt a chill pass over me. You mean? Indeed. Holmes's voice dropped to a murmur. Professor Moriarty. Lestrade let out an incredulous laugh. Moriarty? The old wives' tale? Holmes smiled faintly. A tale, you say? And yet every crime of precision and brilliance seems to bear his fingerprints. No, Lestrade. He is very real. And if this theft was but a piece in his greater design, then I fear we have only just glimpsed the edge of the web. Miss Dunwich's face had turned pale. Then even if I had refused, I would not have escaped him. Holmes's expression softened. No, Miss Dunwich, none ever do. For the first time that evening, a deep and oppressive silence filled the room. The following morning, at Holmes's insistence, we accompanied Lestrade to Scotland Yard, where Sir Reginald Blythe had spent the night in a holding cell. His countenance, usually so composed, was drawn with exhaustion. Yet as we entered, I saw the flicker of undying pride in his eyes. I assume, gentlemen, that you have finally come to your senses. Lestrade cleared his throat gruffly. You're free to go, Sir Reginald. The financier exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. And what of my reputation? Will it be as swiftly restored as it was tarnished? Holmes studied him for a moment. Reputation, Sir Reginald, is a delicate thing, but the truth will come to light. You are merely a convenient scapegoat. Blythe scoffed. Convenient indeed. I suppose I should thank you. Holmes only inclined his head. I require no gratitude, Sir Reginald. I only seek the truth. And with that, we left him, an innocent man, yet one forever marked by suspicion. Later that evening, as we sat by the fire at 221B Baker Street, I could not contain my admiration. Holmes, this case was impossible at every turn, yet you unravelled it with nothing but logic and observation. You are remarkable. Holmes exhaled softly, gazing into the flames. Perhaps, Watson. And yet, I find no satisfaction in this conclusion. I frowned. Why? The crime is solved. Justice has been served. He turned to me, his eyes distant and unreadable. No, Watson. The crime was merely a move in a much larger game. Moriarty remains unseen, untouched, and that is what troubles me. I sighed. Even so, you have won this round. Holmes allowed himself a faint smile. Perhaps. But tell me, Watson, do you believe the Professor will accept defeat so easily? A slow unease settled in my chest. Holmes leaned back. No, my dear friend. This was only the beginning. Holmes picked up his violin and drew the bow across the strings, his voice barely above a whisper. The world is full of mysteries, my dear Watson. Some are meant to be solved, and some merely to remind us that we are never truly alone in the game of shadows. And the music played on. As the last notes of Holmes's violin drifted into silence, I set down my pipe and studied my friend. He sat motionless, his fingers steepled, his expression lost in contemplation. "You are troubled, Holmes," I observed. He did not look at me, but spoke in a quiet, measured tone. "This case, Watson, was never about a necklace. It was about influence. Beatrice Dunwich did not steal out of greed, nor out of malice. She was merely a piece moved by an unseen hand." "You mean Moriarty?" I said. Holmes nodded. "His true crime is not merely theft, but control. He turns honest men into criminals, forces the innocent into compromise, and always remains untouched. That, Watson, is his greatest trick of all." I frowned. "Then how does one defeat a man who never acts with his own hands?" Holmes gave a thin smile. "By finding the one mistake he did not account for." I leaned forward. "And what would that be?" Holmes's eyes gleamed. "That, my dear Watson, is for the keenest minds to decide." "What do you think was the criminal's biggest mistake in this case? Was it Beatrice's nervous hands, the misplaced vial, or something far more subtle? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed unraveling this mystery, subscribe for more Sherlock Holmes adventures and join us as we uncover even greater puzzles ahead. And if you have friends who love a good detective story, share this case with them. Perhaps they will see a clue we overlooked. The game is always afoot, and the next mystery awaits.